Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Gravity. Now this was a difficult weekend for me because I wanted to see both Gravity and Runner Runner, but I only had time to watch one, and Runner Runner ended up being panned by critics, whereas Gravity pretty much received a big sloppy metaphorical blowjob by both general audiences and critics alike, so I decided to go ahead and choose that one. In 2D, I wasn't sure if the 3D was getting any good reviews or not, and I didn't really check, so I figure I might as well be a cheapskate and just watch the 2D version. But I have to admit, I was very concerned about this movie going into it. When I first saw the trailers, I thought it looked like the trailers themselves were really well put together, but I was worried that it would be sort of like Open Water. Now, for those who actually remember Open Water came out in 2003, I believe. God, I feel so old. And the whole premise of that was this couple gets stranded in the middle of the ocean, where they have to deal with the crappy weather, dehydration, and sharks, and very terrifying scenario. But cinematically, it didn't really work out. It really amounted to two people floating around in the ocean for an hour and a half and bitching at each other. That was pretty much everything that occurred in Open Water up until the very, very ending. And that's just not very exciting to me. So I was worried that Gravity would start off with a pretty cool action scene like the trailer showcased, but then it would be just an hour and a half of her floating around in space. That sounds incredibly boring. It wasn't told, but I heard that there was some behind-the-scenes production problems. That's never a good thing, although it's not necessarily automatic damnation. I mean, World War Z turned out pretty well. But then the critics started watching Gravity, and they ended up loving it, and that really only partially increased my expectations, because the critics also loved 127 Hours. I believe that's what it was called. Were based off a true story as well, where the guy gets trapped in a cave under a rock, and he's pretty much stuck there, and he monologues about how bleak his situation is, and has flashbacks and shit like that. And that movie, even though the critics adored it, I was just bored. It's a very interesting true story, but it just did not translate very well into film. Of course, many people like that movie. I didn't. I fell asleep on it. Or I didn't actually fall asleep, but I was starting to fall asleep, and I had to wake myself up many, many times. So that's what my main concern surrounding Gravity was. It would be one of those kinds of movies where, it would just be really, really slow-paced and dull, but the critics would like it because it has some great acting and, some pretty inspired dialogue. But now that I've watched the film, if you shared my concerns, you don't have to worry. Gravity is actually a surprisingly entertaining movie. It's actually fairly fast-paced. It starts off, they're repairing this satellite or whatever, and the Russians blow up one of their own satellites, and the debris gets kind of caught in the orbit, and it's kind of going around the Earth, wiping out every space station and satellite in its path, creating more debris. So that finally reaches the main characters within like 10 minutes, and you have a great action scene. And okay, so she gets separated, and you think, okay, that's going to be the movie. She's going to be floating around for an hour and a half, once again monologuing about how bleak her situation is, and but that's not the case. Actually, she manages to get back to the shuttle really quickly, even though it ends up being destroyed. And from then on, she's actively trying to survive this. And that's what I really liked. I remember being surprised. I know this is going to be an odd comparison. I watched Open Water 2 not too long after I watched Open Water 1, and at first I was pissed off because there were no sharks, but I liked it a lot more in the end because it was more about the characters actively trying to get out of this situation instead of just, resigning themselves to their fate and just floating around in the water for 2 hours. And this is much more like that. She is actively trying to get out of this. So, the first plan is to get to, there's a Russian space center nearby, and but of course when she reaches there, it's not in good shape either. And as soon as she gets there too, like a fire starts. It's one thing always seems to happen after another. And another movie I might compare it to is Buried. Buried is also, I think, a pretty good film because it's not just him being trapped in a coffin. There's all sorts of shit going on in that coffin from, you know, a snake getting in to fire starting. I love that kind of stuff. To me, it just really adds to the intensity, and Gravity did a really good job at that. So yeah, it moved really well. There's generally an action scene, and then it'll slow down a little bit, so there's a more character-oriented scene, and it's still intense in its own way because often, like, she's running out of oxygen or whatever, but it's her trying to get to the next action set piece, and then that action set piece will be awesome. And it really didn't start slowing down too much until closer to the end. I actually felt that was one of the big flaws of Gravity, where it eventually slows down to a crawl between the second and third act, where, you know, she loses all hope and it's very talky, and it slowed down too much for too long. So even though it picks back up when it comes to the ending, I have to admit it had already lost me. So I was like, okay, let's just go ahead and get this over with. So yeah, that was cool. How good are the action scenes? They're phenomenal. The special effects are flawless, but it's how they're used that really impressed me. You have some gorgeous cinematography. You know, considering space is kind of boring to look at, you'd think that would be a problem, but no, they find plenty of different shots that really emphasize the beauty of space while not glorifying it too much. There's always something sinister about every shot and every location, where space is just as beautiful as it is deadly, and I really liked that. And one thing too I forgot to mention, since the debris is, you know, moving around in orbit, it keeps coming back, so it's not just one scene. In fact, in the trailer, I believe they spliced together two different action scenes, so like they say every hour and a half in the movie the debris is going to come back and cause more mayhem. But there's no sound in space, and they really play that up. So you'll have a scene where she's, you know, trying to get in one of the spacecrafts or space shuttles, or you know, try to detach a certain thing from it so she can get away, and you're seeing all this debris slam into the space station in the background and causing all this destruction, but you don't hear any explosions. You just hear her heavy breathing and the music, and something about the way the sound design just really made the action scenes much more unique. But what really surprised me was the cinematography. Now, when it comes to most special effects late in films, usually either they have to cover up the flaws within the special effects, so the camera work is often going to be shaky, or it's going to be too tightly edited, and that's going to usually annoy me. But here, it's all very smooth. I saw everything in detail, and everything was immaculately framed and staged. There's not a single shot that did not work. I mean, they had this one scene where George Clooney and Sandra Bullock are in the foreground. They're trying to get everything packed up while the debris starts hitting the first time, and you see this other astronaut in the background dealing with his own issues as debris starts coming towards him. But at the same time, it never takes focus off of George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, but you could see everything that's going on in the background clearly. I could make out every detail, and that was just amazing. So yeah, visually this movie is stunning, but it's also incredibly intense. I totally agree with the critics in that it's both mesmerizing and kind of terrifying too. Acting-wise, I do believe Sandra Bullock has been sort of overhyped. She does a really good job. Honestly, though, it's funny because when she ended up getting the Oscar for The Blind Side, I felt that she didn't really deserve it. She did a solid job in that film too, but I felt there was nothing exceptional about her performance. I actually am changing my mind because to her credit, in The Blind Side, I didn't feel that she was just playing Sandra Bullock. She was playing a very interesting character, even though I thought The Blind Side as a whole was an overrated movie. So I'd say that if she gets nominated for this, I thought she did better in The Blind Side. I think she's still Sandra Bullock in this movie, but she does get to show off a lot of range. From, you know, she gets to be scared, sad, pissed off, charming. You know, there's so many emotions she gets to play with, but for the most part, it's still just Sandra Bullock. I can never she never became a different character. To me, she was just kind of a mopey version of Sandra Bullock, but still, she did a really good job. George Clooney, though, to me, stole the show every scene he's in, and he's in the movie quite a bit. He has the best dialogue to work with, and he's so charming and funny that yeah, I love George Clooney in this movie. He was a lot of fun. But in terms of the characters themselves, the characters are actually very standard. Honestly, I felt if they have any depth to them, it's just how the actors portray them. I thought Prisoners, another film that really went over the critics that came out earlier, or last month, I guess. I thought that had more interesting characters. Here, though, you had Sandra Bullock. She has a kind of a tragic past, and I do respect that they don't linger on it too much, but otherwise, it's a relatively normal, conventional role. What else can I really say? I think the biggest flaw of Gravity, which to me keeps it from being a great movie, is it's very predictable. I pretty much knew where it was going to go in terms of the fates of various characters. I knew how it was going to end, and to me that just sort of diminished its impact. I would not call Gravity a great film. I'd say it has greatness within it, but I'd even still say that it's more style over substance. So I'm a little surprised that the critics have loved this as much as they did. I honestly didn't think this movie had any more substance than Elysium, which the critics didn't care for as much. But still, I mean, there's really nothing wrong with style over substance. If the critics overreacted to its greatness, then they overreacted, and I guess I should be glad that they liked it, because Gravity deserves to get positive reviews from everybody, because I thought it was a strong film, but I definitely don't see it going down in history as a classic. Although at least I will concede that even though it's not an original movie, how they mix it takes elements from various other films, but how it mixes them together makes it seem kind of unique. And I don't want to say original, I'm just going to say unique. Sort of like how District 9, in my opinion, was not an original film, but it mixed everything up so well that it made it appear more original than it really was. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either, as long as you're aware of that. But like if I compared it to Prisoners, I think Prisoners was a much better film. It had a stronger story, it had better characters, and I think it had it resisted the cliches that Gravity would ultimately fall victim to. But Gravity might have a more lasting legacy, because something about it, what it does right, really, really stands out. So I think people will remember it much more than they remember Prisoners, even though I believe Prisoners is the better movie. So would I recommend it? Obviously, yes. I'd say go ahead and watch it in theaters. Will I say watch it in 3D? I don't know. Find another reviewer who did watch it in 3D and go based off of that. Don't expect a great movie, expect a good one. Then you should be pleased with it. If it ends up being great in your opinion, then good for you. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. Written reviews, what did I do? Saw 2, so read that. I also did a written review of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, which is a weird title considering it's the third Mechagodzilla movie. I plan on doing a written review of The Lords of Salem. I don't know if I'll get that up today or tomorrow. I'm going to try to get it up today, so hopefully it'll be up by the time you see this video, but we'll have to see. As for critiquing the critics, I know I keep saying I'm going to get on it this week or next week or whatever. Work really screwed up my schedule, so I'm trying to adapt to that, but I'm working on it as fast as I can, and we'll just have to see when that comes out. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.